Do you think you're ever going to figure out how this awakening and enlightenment works? I know who you are. You tend to be from about 55 to 70 years old. You've probably been pursuing this goal of awakening and enlightenment for at least 10 years, sometimes longer. I met somebody the other day who'd been on the path for 50 years. I've met people recently who've been on the path for only a couple years. But everybody wants to know one thing. How do you do this? Is there a how-to? What is it I'm supposed to do to have this experience? Well, my promise to you today is I'm going to give you a different view as to how this works and what you can do to make this happen. And in order to do this, I'm going to have to tread lightly on somebody I respect very much, and that's Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle has probably done more than any single individual in my lifetime to raise consciousness and to bring these issues and principles to the surface, to the mainstream, so everybody can work on them. But I have the unhappy task of looking at this a little differently, and I'm going to show it to you, and let's see if you can find value and catch the vision of what I'm trying to say about this. So let's look at Tolle's famous exercise, I call it the cat and mouse game. But what I'm going to tell you today is the mouse catches the cat before the exercise even starts, and I'll show you how this works. So here's the exercise in case you're not aware of it. He says, and this is from his book, The Power of Now, try a little experiment, close your eyes and say to yourself, I wonder what my next thought is going to be. Now, I just want to pause right there and talk about a couple principles. We know that one of the things we need to do is get out of the world of thought. We need to be able to escape thoughts. We need to be able to have better thoughts, suppress thoughts, no longer believe we are our thoughts. And the other thing is, if you go deeper into this, you realize that full enlightenment is a realization that there is no self, that the individual person in a way doesn't exist. And so, this idea of no self and no thought permeates all the literature on enlightenment. So let's go back to this and take a look at what's happening here in this exercise. So close your eyes and say to yourself, I wonder what my next thought is going to be. I just want to tell you right now, that is the next thought. I wonder what the next thought is going to be, is the next thought. So let's define what a thought is. A thought is the words of your language in your mind. It's the voice in your head that sounds like you talking to you. Now we're talking about verbal thought here. So, going inside and saying to yourself, what is my next thought, is a thought. This is very important. The other thing is to say to yourself, what is the next thought, means that you are manufacturing the self that is supposed to disappear when you become enlightened. So what's happening in this instruction is we're setting up a person called a self that is talking to themselves in their heads about the next thought they're going to have. I have a problem with that because my definition of thinking is talking to yourself and believing that voice in your head is who you are. So let's go on and take a look at this a little further and see what the next step is as he discusses this exercise a little more. Then he says, become very alert and wait for the next thought. Be like a cat watching a mouse. Be like a cat watching a mouse hole. And then he says, what thought is going to come out of the mouse hole? And what I'm saying to you is the thought came out of the mouse hole when the exercise began. Because asking yourself, what is the next thought? That is the mouse. The mouse came out of the hole right there. But the person doing the exercise was not aware in that moment that they were actually experiencing a thought. Talking to yourself in your head in words is a thought. Now we're talking about verbal thought here. We're not talking about mental images, and we're not talking about cognition non-verbally where, you recognize somebody's face or, you remember the directions to your house or something like that. We're talking about the comments we make to ourselves all day long. I wonder, what we're going to have for dinner. Oh, it looks like it's going to rain tomorrow. Gosh, I didn't shave very well this morning. I need to get my hair cut on Saturday. All those comments that we think are we talking to we are in fact thoughts. And so this whole thing starts, I believe, with the mouse catching the cat. I wonder what my next thought is going to be. So then what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the next thought to jump out of the mouse hole. And then finally, Tolle says, as long as we're in a state of intense presence, you are free of thought. You are still yet highly alert. Now, let me explain what's actually happening here. When you intensely focus, you activate a network in the brain called the task positive network. It's basically centered in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex up here. Okay, why is that important? Well, the narrator, the storyteller, the source of verbal thought in the brain is a network in the brain called the default mode network. Those two networks are negatively correlated. So whenever you are focused on a task, the default mode network is suppressed and the voice in your head will go away. And you know this is true because whenever you watch your favorite TV show, there's no commentary going on in your head. If you're a golfer or an athlete of any kind, you know that if there's commentary going on in your head, your game has probably gone to heck and you're in trouble. If you're a golfer and you're thinking about your score and you're thinking about your next shot, you're in deep trouble. When you're in that space of no thought where you're focused and concentrating, there is no verbal thought going on in your head, and the brain and body mechanism is free to go ahead and perform without interference. And so what's happening when you're outside of the mouse hole waiting for that next thought with intense focus, what's happening is those two networks in the brain have triggered. The default mode network is being suppressed and the voice in your head has gone quiet. Okay, that's fine. Well, let's take another look at this. I have a problem with the phrase intense presence. In my vernacular, there is no such thing as intense presence. There's presence and intensity. And so what I believe is being set up in this exercise is a forced focus that has nothing whatsoever to do with presence. Presence can't be forced or manufactured or ginned up. It's something that we're always in that emerges. Now, my way of thinking about presence is not to pursue presence, it's to pursue everything that's not present. So what's not presence? Thinking is not present. Being aware of a self as an individual agent who's doing things, that's not presence. So when I'm on the golf course and I'm about to take a swing, if I'm thinking about a person named Mark who's going to swing the golf club, I'm in serious trouble, and that's not presence. If there is no thought going on in my head and I'm simply easily relaxed and focusing on the game, then I'm going to probably make a good shot. So the idea that we're going to have intense presence, I have a bit of a problem with that because it seems like an oxymoron to me. And yet I know many, many people who are pursuing this intensity of presence, and they think, and they feel guilty because they can't get it. I mean, they keep working on this thing and they just, they can't get present. Well, you can't get present when you're trying to do something. And as we know from the philosophy of enlightenment, there is no doer. So doing doesn't create presence. Disidentification is what creates presence. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So there are two ways of teaching this from my standpoint. As I look at what Tolle is doing in his work, he is mainly teaching presence. And presence is the roadmap to take you to the awakening. In my work, what I've discovered, I teach disidentification from thought. Now, let me tell you where I came from that, how I arrived at that. I watched Tolle being interviewed, and he literally described his awakening experience. He wakes up one night, it's 2 or 3 in the morning, he's depressed, he's suicidal, and he says to himself, I can't live with myself any longer. And he immediately realizes that thought makes no sense because, are there two of him or one of him? And in doing so, he steps back and separates from the thought to examine this. And when he does that, he uses the word disidentification. And then once the disidentification is established, and what does that mean? That means he suddenly realized that he was not the voice in his head and thought disappeared. In that moment, he awakened. And trust me, this is a spiritual, psychological, and emotional awakening that takes place. Okay, well, then he was in presence. And so I believe he's made the assumption that the route is presence. I'm saying the goal is presence. The triggering event was the disidentification. And so what I teach in my practice for 30 years, I teach my clients how to disidentify from the voice in their head. And it's a simple exercise called moment mindfulness. And with moment mindfulness, you just sit with your eyes open, not to be mistaken for meditation or prayer, and you just gently wait for the next thought. There's no intensity to this at all. There is no observer. There is only observation. Somebody said, observing is the next thought. No, observing is not a thought. Observing is a state. The observer is a thought, and eventually the observer needs to disappear. And then you just, like in Tolle's exercise, you wait for the next thought. But you don't use the metaphor of a mouse hole, you just use the metaphor of the sun and clouds drifting across the sun in the sky. And the next thought will drift across. And what you do is gently notice that you're thinking. You don't focus on the thought itself. The content of the thought is not important. What's important is the fact that you are the observer observing thinking. Again, as I described earlier, in that moment, those networks in your brain switch and the default mode network is suppressed and the voice in your head immediately goes away. Now, what happens when you do this exercise is eventually you realize, wait a minute, every time I focus on the voice in my head, the voice goes away, and eventually you wake up and you realize I'm not the voice in my head, and you experience that disidentification. And so if you go back to this and look at this, you can see how starting the exercise by closing your eyes and saying to yourself, I wonder what the next thought is going to be, sets up a paradox. Because a self talking to themselves is the very thing we're trying to disidentify from so we can experience awakening. Now, I discussed this in my latest book called Free of the Mind. There'll be a link below. There's links for lots of stuff in the description. But I just wanted to go through this with you today and give you my perspective on this. With all due respect to Tolle, who's an absolute giant, and I admire him very much, and it gives me no pleasure to appear to be criticizing him in any way, shape, or form, but I wanted to give you this look at this. If you will try moment mindfulness, you will find out what Robert did the other day when we had our discovery call. I took Robert through this discovery call, and I took him through moment mindfulness. He went through it twice, and he began to cry. He's been on this path for 50 years trying to experience the awakening, and he got it, just like that. In the instant he got it, he knew he got it. He experienced himself as being disidentified from the voice in his head and being outside of the system of thought, and he began to weep. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So this can happen for you too. It's no guarantee, but this is a different path. If you would like some help, reach out, and we'll be happy to support you. We have live streams going every week and a number of resources, so don't be a stranger. We're here to help. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye.